A season finished up. How are you feeling about it?
Great. I'm happy we got through it. Like for 5 years, I want a series.
Right from the very first moments of his 1985 interview with Entertainment Tonight, a gentle statement filled with a lifetime's weight from Malcolm Jamal Warner left a profound impression. At the age of 14, just stepping out of the first season of The Cosby Show, young Malcolm Jamal Warner had already been dubbed America's Son, a cultural icon, a symbol of hope for Black America. But was the immortality he was granted truly a reward? Or was it a debt, one that would last a lifetime? Today, as news of Malcolm's passing has just been confirmed, those who once admired him mourn not only a talent, but also a man who quietly carried deep private wounds for nearly 40 years. Behind that gentle smile and those soft eyes were 10 conflicts that shaped Malcolm's life, from youthful resentments, unfulfilled loves, and betrayed beliefs to a shattered legacy, caused by the mistakes of the one who once led. In his final journey, what remained and what would forever haunt him, let us follow each emotional fragment to understand why Malcolm was not just an actor, but a symbol of calm kindness and resilience, even when his heart was full of cracks. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the untold stories behind the spotlight. To begin that journey, where each chapter is a scar of time, we return to the early years of his career, when the stage lights still shone brightly and friendships felt eternal. The first name on the list is none other than the one who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Malcolm in his youth, Carl Anthony Payne II. Youthful resentment and the lesson of quiet pride. In 1984, The Cosby Show officially aired on American television, quickly becoming one of the most successful family sitcoms of all time. Among its cast, the character Theo Huxtable, the son of Dr. Cliff, was loved by a wide audience for his innocence, humor, and sincerity. This role turned Malcolm Jamal Warner, then only 14 years old, from an unknown teenager into a nationwide star overnight. But few knew that from the very first days on set, he carried a lingering wound, one that came from his closest on-screen companion. Carl Anthony Payne II, born in 1969, and 1 year older than Malcolm, was a promising young actor from New York. During the casting for The Cosby Show, Carl didn't audition for a supporting role. He tried out for Theo and nearly landed it. According to Malcolm's later accounts, Carl was even flown from the East Coast to the West Coast for a screen test and seemed to have the role in the bag. But just days later, Malcolm showed up and the director chose to give the lead role to this teenager from Los Angeles. Carl had to settle for a supporting part, Walter Cockroach, Bradley Theo's best friend on the show. On screen, they played loyal best friends, sharing awkward school moments together. But behind the cameras, there was no friendship at all. "We didn't get along," Malcolm said bluntly in an interview years later. Carl had a huge ego, and I had very little patience for people like that. Youth often carries fragile pride. For Carl, losing the lead role, then having to play second to the person he once hoped to replace, was likely a quiet scratch on his self-worth. As for Malcolm, standing every day beside a co-star who didn't hide his discontent forced him to learn how to keep his distance. There were no explosive arguments, no shocking scandals, just a mutual coldness, an unspoken distance that had no name. In Malcolm's words, that relationship simply could not grow. By season 4, the character Cockroach suddenly disappeared from the show, never mentioned again. Rumors suggested Carl was fired for refusing to cut his hair to fit the show's image. But there were also theories that the underlying tension with his co-star and with the crew played a role in his removal. Malcolm never publicly discussed this, and perhaps he never needed to. His silence was a quiet confirmation that something had never been right. It wasn't until nearly 3 decades later that the two could speak to each other comfortably again. No apologies, no digging up the past, just simple forgiveness carried out in silence. Malcolm called it the maturity of time. And then after Carl Payne, Malcolm's life would bring him across others who would hurt him more deeply, disappoint him more profoundly. Among them was someone he once called my greatest teacher, the man who brought him into the profession, but who later became a collapsed icon in Malcolm's heart. That man's name was Bill Cosby. And that is another chapter, a heavier one, no longer about youthful conflict, but about the fall of a spiritual father figure. The shock of Bill Cosby's scandal. For Malcolm Jamal Warner, Bill Cosby was not just a colleague or director. He was a first mentor, an artistic father, and in some way a moral symbol for an entire generation of African Americans. In the early years of The Cosby Show, it was Cosby who placed great expectations on Malcolm, frequently giving him advice about acting behavior and even schoolwork. It was a master-apprentice relationship full of guidance, something Malcolm had once considered a personal source of pride. He showed me that a black man could own national television, could become a positive role model, could bring a black family to the screen, without needing any negative stereotype Malcolm once shared. The Cosby Show wasn't merely a sitcom. It was a cultural declaration, a visual revolution in the American entertainment industry. That's why, when the first allegations of sexual assault against Cosby surfaced at the end of 2014, it felt like a blow to Malcolm's memories. At the time, more than 30 women came forward. The accusations included claims that Cosby used drugs to paralyze his victims before committing the assaults incidents spanning from the 1960s to the 2000s. At first, Malcolm remained silent. It wasn't avoidance, but a pause for reflection. How could he accept that the man who once taught him to live with integrity was now being accused of being a predator in the dark? How could he separate his good personal memories from a brutal truth that was being revealed layer by layer? It was one of the most painful and confusing experiences of my life, he later admitted. I can't deny that he had a positive influence on me, but I also can't deny what he did to others. Malcolm chose a path that was honest, yet humane. He did not defend Cosby, nor did he deny the personal debt. He shared that he felt ashamed, deeply, heartbroken, and needed time to understand what really happened. Unlike some colleagues who tried to make excuses or stayed completely silent, Malcolm spoke up at the right moment and in the right way. In an interview with The Real, he said, "I think the hardest part is separating the artist's persona from their real-life behavior. But if we don't do that, we keep covering up, we keep staying silent. And that's the most dangerous thing." Bill Cosby's downfall didn't just destroy the image of a television father. It brought with it a wave of disillusionment across the African American community, people who had once seen him as a symbol of hope and dignity restored after decades of prejudice. For Malcolm, it was also the collapse of a personal role model, someone who had once lifted him up from the very beginning. Creative conflict with Eddie Griffin. After overcoming the disappointment surrounding Bill Cosby, Malcolm Jamal Warner knew he needed a new direction, a chance to prove himself as a mature artist. That opportunity came in 1996 in the form of a new sitcom, Malcolm and Eddie. Unlike the structured family tone of The Cosby Show, Malcolm and Eddie was a buddy comedy, a format that relies on the contrast between two lead characters to create humor. Malcolm played Malcolm McGee, a serious and responsible auto mechanic. His co-star, Eddie Griffin, portrayed Eddie Sherman, an energetic, loud, mischievous roommate constantly causing trouble. Once again, the two represented completely different creative worlds. Malcolm was shaped by a disciplined television environment that emphasized order and standards. Eddie, on the other hand, was a stand-up comic from the Richard Pryor school, where sharp humor came with defiance and sometimes rebellion. On screen, they were opposites who complemented each other. But behind the scenes, those differences no longer created laughs. They became silent cracks in their working relationship. "We really didn't get along in real life," Malcolm once admitted frankly. "I come from the Cosby school discipline structure. Eddie was the opposite. There were many times when I felt like I just couldn't take it anymore. Those differences played out daily on set. Eddie was often late, sometimes broke from the script and preferred improvisation. Malcolm wasn't like that. He needed structure and tension and depth. Every week the two had to face each other for hours. Tensions at times reached a point where the network had to intervene and mediate. Yet surprisingly, Malcolm and Eddie ran for 4 seasons. Neither of them left the project. And every week before filming, Malcolm and Eddie still prayed together. In that brief moment, all conflicts were put aside and only one shared goal remained. Forget all the feelings we need to finish this show. We're doing it for the craft, for the audience, and for the royalties later. But by the 4th season, just as the show was nearing the 100-episode milestone, the golden number for syndication, the producers suddenly canceled the show at episode 89. They got tired of my arguments with the writers, Malcolm said. And they were also just tired of Eddie. Instead of reaching the final destination, everything stopped just one step away from long-term profit. Another opportunity slipped away. What's notable is that over time, Malcolm held no grudges. He didn't speak harshly of Eddie didn't blame his co-star. On the contrary, he acknowledged that their conflicts weren't betrayals, just differences that weren't yet understood. "Now we're really close," Malcolm laughed. "We left everything in the past. I can sit and have a beer with Eddie now and not feel irritated anymore." The story of Malcolm and Eddie wasn't just a professional clash. It was a reflection of a larger issue in the entertainment industry, where Black performers, despite coming from different backgrounds, are often placed on the same stage and expected to fit into a pre-designed television format. When laughter becomes a product, is there still room for the artist to truly be themselves? And when personal differences aren't properly recognized, is each battle between two individuals really a loss for the entire culture, where diverse voices are diluted by the expectation to conform? After Malcolm and Eddie, Malcolm moved on, but the lessons about compromise, difference, and the effort to maintain professionalism stayed with him. And then the off-screen conflicts didn't stop with co-stars. Some of the deepest tensions would lie elsewhere, with those who wrote his very lines, the writers he didn't hesitate to push back against. The silent battle in the writer's room. There was one thing Malcolm Jamal Warner always held firmly throughout his career. He was not just a line reader, he was an artist. And to him, every line of dialogue, every action of a character was a cultural statement, a reflection of how the Black community was being portrayed on screen. That's why when he took on the lead role in Malcolm and Eddie, Malcolm didn't just care about his character, he asked deeper questions. What story are we telling? What are we making the audience laugh at, and at whose expense? But not everyone on the production team shared that concern. From the very first season, Malcolm began to have disagreements with the show's writers. Cheap jokes, stereotypical lines, character types that recycled social biases, all of it made him unable to stay silent. I constantly had to ask for line changes. There were episodes where I felt like I was the only one in the room who understood that what we wrote would impact how my community is seen, he said, and so the meetings became tense. There was no yelling, but quiet friction ran deep. Malcolm didn't raise his voice, but every word he spoke was deliberate and carried a message. I'm not here just to act. I have a responsibility to the community I represent. Sometimes the writers thought he was too perfectionist, too difficult. But to Malcolm, it was professional integrity, something he could not compromise. I wasn't fighting for my ego, he once said. I was fighting for respect, for the character, for the audience, and for my own community. He refused to let the audience's laughter be built on exaggerated Black characters or on situations that echoed decades-old prejudices. Not everyone understood, and not everyone wanted change. By the fourth season, Malcolm admitted he was exhausted from having to fight nearly every day. He had hoped that when the show neared the 100-episode mark, the golden milestone in American television, things would ease up. But they didn't. Malcolm and Eddie was canceled at episode 89. Just 11 episodes away from financial stability, from syndication rights, from a reward for all the effort. But that opportunity slipped away. And Malcolm knew that part of the reason was because he refused to stay quiet. But he had no regrets. There are things more important than royalties. Principles, Malcolm said. If I don't speak up when I see something wrong, then I'm no longer myself. And indeed, he did not let compromise destroy the artist within him, even when that meant losing opportunities, losing positions, and losing comfort in professional relationships. That story was not just a conflict between actor and writer. It was a glimpse into a larger issue. Do Black artists have the right to redefine how they are portrayed in media? Or must they yield and accept the molds written by others, just to keep the role, to keep their place? Malcolm chose no. He chose the harder path. But that hardship shaped the Malcolm the public came to know, a deep, determined artist, unafraid to stand alone if it meant standing for what was right. Still, not every battle happens in the workplace. Some are quieter and more painful, where there is no enemy, only helplessness in the face of fate. Like the time he had to watch the woman who had been the greatest love of his life slowly drift away in silence, in illness, and he could do nothing to hold on. That story is a loss, named Michelle Thomas. The loss named Michelle. In the early years of The Cosby Show, amid the tight filming schedule and the ever-brightening spotlight of fame, There was something that stirred the teenage heart of Malcolm Jamal Warner. The eyes, the voice, and the charming smile of Michelle Thomas, the actress who played Justine Theo Huxtable's girlfriend. On screen and off, they were once a youthful couple, gentle in sync and seemingly destined to go far together. Michelle Thomas was born in 1968, 1 year younger than Malcolm, and the daughter of famed musician Dennis Thomas of Kool and the Gang. Her soft beauty, bright eyes, and natural wit made Michelle both striking on screen and warm in person. After The Cosby Show, she continued to shine in the role of Myra Monkhouse on Family Matters, and throughout the 1990s, her career steadily rose. But for Malcolm, what mattered more than her career was the friendship and love they had shared and preserved. They were in love for 6 years from 1988 to 1994. Even after they broke up, they stayed in touch, kept watching out for each other in life and in their work. But fate did not grant Michelle a peaceful ending. In late 1997, she was diagnosed with a rare form of stomach cancer. The illness progressed rapidly and mercilessly. Upon hearing the news, Malcolm didn't hesitate. He left work immediately and flew to New York to be with her in her final days. The hospital room held no stage lights, no lines, no applause, only a frail young woman lying there, and a man quietly holding her hand. Not Theo, not any character, but Malcolm himself, a man witnessing his former love slipping away from the world little by little. Their final moment together was a whisper. Michelle looked into his eyes and softly said, "Elephant juice." It was a phrase they once used to say, "I love you," because when spoken slowly, the lips mimicked the shape of those sacred 3 words. Malcolm squeezed her hand and replied the same, "Elephant juice." That was it, and then she was gone. There was no loud media funeral, no long public statements, only a deep silence in Malcolm's heart. He rarely spoke about Michelle afterward, not because he forgot, but because her memory was too precious for careless words. Yet in the few times he did mention her, his eyes softened, his voice dropped, and it became clear the pain had never fully healed. This loss, as Malcolm later admitted, was the first fracture in his youthful optimism. From then on, he began to see life with deeper layers, no longer just the cheerful actor, but a man who had lost a part of his heart. He didn't let the grief consume him, but held it as an inseparable part of his being. He once said, "When you've watched someone you love die, everything else in life seems smaller." Since Michelle's passing, Malcolm became more private about love. He never spoke publicly about a wife or children, nor did he let his romantic life become a topic for discussion. To him, love was something to protect, not to put on display. Perhaps part of that quietness came from the old wound the pain of losing Michelle had taught him, that the most precious things in life are often the most fragile. But that loss also gave birth to something strange and powerful in mourning. Malcolm discovered a new creative depth. He began writing spoken word poetry, releasing music with introspective and contemplative themes. He stepped on stage not just as an actor, but as someone who had known pain, known loss, and knew how to cherish each moment of being alive. That incomplete love filled with sadness, gentleness, and quiet endurance didn't weigh him down, but became a silent force that lifted him up. Because it's in grief that one learns the subtlety of compassion. And through Michelle, Malcolm became a man who knew how to live with silence, to cherish what cannot be held, to keep walking without losing memory. Still, love wasn't the only wound he carried. There were other relationships, ones that didn't end in death, but still left cracks in his pride, like the deep connection with another famous actress, someone who loved him with all her heart, but had to learn how to let go. On Valentine's Day, her name was Regina King. When love can't find the same rhythm. If Michelle Thomas was the first love that left a gentle ache in Malcolm Jamal Warner's memory, then Regina King was the mature relationship where love came with expectations and heartbreak carried the weight of silence rather than tears. Both were familiar faces to American television audiences. Regina by then was already known for her roles in 227 Boys and the Hood, and later major works like Ray. The Leftovers, If Beale Street Could Talk, the latter, earning her an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. Malcolm had grown from the boy Theo into a multifaceted artist, actor, director, poet, musician. They stood on opposite sides of Hollywood but shared cultural roots and a deep understanding of what it meant to be black in a white-dominated industry, a connection that made them instantly relatable to each other. They began dating in 2011, and by all appearances kept things very private. No drama, no flood of public photos. Yet within the industry, people knew they were a couple deep enough to talk about the future. Regina once said, "We grew up together, not in age, but in awareness." But in early 2013, the relationship ended. No warning, no scandal, no accusations. Regina simply said in an interview with Essence, "We broke up on Valentine's Day. There was no letter, no message. I just got silence. And it really hurt." Malcolm never contested that statement. He remained silent, just as he had with other losses before. But this time the silence didn't represent reverence. It became a scratch on Regina's pride, and perhaps also a reflection of Malcolm himself, a man who, when hurt, withdraws instead of confronting. No one knows the true reason. Perhaps it was a difference in how they dealt with pressure, or an irreconcilable disconnect. But the truth is, two people who once felt in sync enough to consider marriage ended up with a silence that no one could fill. From a broader perspective, that relationship revealed something familiar about adult love. Sometimes no one is wrong. It's just that two people no longer move at the same pace, no longer share the same melody. And when one chooses silence to retreat, the other loses not only the love, but also the chance for closure. It raises a quiet question. Do men like Malcolm, who've endured much pain, many losses, know how to love without causing harm? Or has past hurt made them so guarded that unintentionally they inflict a new kind of pain? After the breakup, Regina King rose with strength, landing major roles and becoming one of the most respected black artists in Hollywood. Malcolm continued living quietly and privately. Their paths no longer crossed. But perhaps somewhere inside both of them, there lingers a small regret, not for what happened, but for how it ended. And after all those heartbreaks from Michelle, from Regina, Malcolm was no longer someone who opened his heart easily. Yet acting would not allow him to remain closed off forever. Because to fully live within a role, he would sometimes have to perform emotions he had once truly felt. And that's when, under the stage lights, old wounds would reappear in the face of a new character. The fight against stereotyped roles. They once called Malcolm Jamal Warner the most successful Cosby kid. He didn't follow the familiar downfall of child stars spiraling into excess scandal or substance abuse. He stayed out of tabloid drama, avoided romantic controversy, and never sabotaged his career with drugs. But sometimes that very cleanliness became a set of invisible shackles in Hollywood, a place rife with distorted expectations of black actors. When The Cosby Show ended in 1992, Malcolm was only in his early 20s, a prime age for a breakout. Yet his career entered a strangely uncertain phase. Many casting directors hesitated. No one denied his talent, but few knew what to do with him. Many roles for black male actors at the time demanded a street edge, a gritty energy, or at least some sense of rebellion. Malcolm, with his kind face, soft-spoken voice, and respectful demeanor, embodied a wholesome TV character more than a cinematic gangster. He once shared openly, "After playing Theo, I didn't want to take on stereotypical roles. I turned down a lot of offers just because they didn't say anything." Ironically, by holding on to his professional dignity, the industry began labeling him as not versatile enough or difficult to rebrand. Malcolm refused to play the deadbeat dad, the clueless drug dealer, or the comic relief black sidekick with no real purpose in the plot. He didn't voice this with anger, but with quiet persistence. He wrote music, crafted poetry, did theater, and waited for scripts with integrity. But that very integrity often left him forgotten in an industry that rewards shock value and easily packaged characters. Perhaps the hardest part wasn't the lack of roles, but watching his white peers of the same generation be given chances to experiment, to fail, and to return. Meanwhile, black actors like himself were expected to live forever in the first version the public remembered them by. For Malcolm, that was Theo Huxtable, sweet, loyal, obedient. An ideal image, but one that never got to grow up. A legacy overshadowed, and the question of collective justice. It wasn't a specific person, but something else that haunted Malcolm Jamal Warner, even in his final days: the downfall of The Cosby Show. A collective pain that dragged down not only careers and reputations, but also the memories of an entire generation of Black artists who had once placed all their faith in the light that the show brought. For Malcolm, this wasn't simply the loss of a role, it was witnessing an entire piece of cultural legacy being tarnished because of one man, the leader making an unforgivable mistake. From 1984 to 1992, The Cosby Show wasn't just America's #1 sitcom. It was a revolutionary symbol. A successful, educated, civil, and kind Black family shown regularly during primetime on national television. At a time when Black people were often associated with crime, poverty, or irresponsibility, the show stood as a sharp counterstatement. Millions of viewers, both white and Black, embraced the Huxtable family as a new kind of role model, a dream made real. And throughout those 8 years, Malcolm Jamal Warner didn't just grow up in age, but also in political and cultural consciousness, thanks largely to the show's positive spirit. But after the wave of allegations against Bill Cosby, everything changed. Networks stopped airing The Cosby Show. No streaming platforms wanted to acquire its rights. Anniversary projects, cast reunions, reboots, all were quietly erased from the calendar. Even DVDs that had once been widely sold disappeared from store shelves. Malcolm said it briefly, but with clear pain. "We lost a major financial opportunity. If not for the scandal, we could have had a reunion show by now, like Fuller House or The Connors. We worked hard, and now everything vanished into thin air." He wasn't angry, and he didn't express resentment, just a quiet regret. "No," he said, when asked whether he blamed Cosby for dragging down the whole show. "I'm not bitter, but this is a very layered situation. It can't be looked at simply." That was Malcolm's way of talking about the complexity of collective justice. When the passion project Read Between the Lines was canceled, few may know that in Malcolm Jamal Warner's quiet but persistent career, Read Between the Lines was one of the rare dreams he truly poured his heart into. Not only because it was a family TV series, the genre that had once brought him to fame, but because this time he was no longer Theo, the boy following someone else's lead. He was a grown man, a father, a psychologist, and most importantly, himself. Premiering in 2011 on Read Between the Lines was expected to be The Cosby Show for a new generation. The series followed the life of Dr. Alex Reed, played by Warner, and his wife Carla, played by Tracee Ellis Ross, a psychology professor and a writer raising 3 children while navigating everyday life filled with meaning. Centered on family values, emotional intelligence, empathy, and healthy living, the show didn't chase sensationalism. It chose a path of goodness, slow, intentional, and full of depth. In several interviews, Malcolm described Read Between the Lines as a project I'm proud of, because it reflects who I truly am. He wasn't just the lead actor, he contributed as a content advisor, helping shape the characters and the show's cultural message. It was one of the few times he worked with a full sense of creative ownership. But Hollywood, or more accurately, the public's taste doesn't always align with beauty and sincerity. Despite the first season receiving positive feedback, BET decided to pull the plug on the second season after only a few early episodes. Tracee Ellis Ross left the project, and the rest was postponed indefinitely, before quietly fading into obscurity. No official announcement, no farewell, just a power cord pulled from the wall. For Malcolm, this wasn't his first disappointment, but it was one of the most painful. Unlike past rejections this time, he had found his place. He was given the opportunity, trusted with it, and then from the same place the door was shut. Not because of scandal, not because of a lack of talent, but simply because the show was too gentle for a world increasingly drawn to chaos and exaggeration. He didn't complain. He simply stepped back the way a true artist faces silence. And just as he once said when he was very young, "I don't need noise. I need something of value." Value, sometimes it lies in knowing when to step away, and to leave behind a quiet space, not because he failed, but because he had finished walking his honest path in a world that chose a different one. Facing public opinion. In an industry where fame and scandal always go hand in hand, Malcolm Jamal Warner learned early on keeping your talent is one thing. Keeping yourself intact is the real challenge. At just 14 years old, he became a national star through his role as Theo Huxtable. And from that moment, he had to learn how to walk in the spotlight without letting it burn him. His teenage years were unlike anyone else's. While his peers were still worrying about homework, Malcolm had become a television role model for millions of American families. From that point on, he no longer belonged only to himself. People thought that because I played Bill Cosby's son, I had to be that same person in real life, he once shared in a 2017 interview. But I was just a kid too. I made mistakes. I was stubborn. I had real emotions that didn't always fit the TV mold. As he grew older, public pressure only intensified. Every relationship he had became a topic of speculation. Michelle, Thomas, Regina King. The women who had once been a part of his life were not just seen as partners, but were turned into symbols of failure by the media every time the relationship ended. In one tabloid headline, the question was, "Why can't Malcolm keep love?" As if his private life were some kind of moral test for public judgment. In the world of Hollywood, where even the smallest details of one's personal life can be exaggerated and commercialized, choosing to live quietly isn't avoidance, it's self-preservation. Malcolm understood that the more he revealed his emotions, the more vulnerable he became. And he didn't want his love or his pain to become fodder for gossip. Many times he turned down interviews because of invasive questions. Have you ever been jealous of someone else's success? What do you think about Regina? Loving someone new? Have you ever felt like a lonely man? These questions weren't meant to understand him, they were meant to stir up attention. And he no longer wanted to feed that storm. Some might say he's guarded, even cold. But in truth, his silence is a form of courage. The courage to say no to selling out emotion for attention. In an industry where many are willing to trade anything to stay relevant, Malcolm chose a longer path, a slower one, but a steadier one. However, no matter how hard he tried to protect himself, there were events that could not be avoided. In 2014, when the wave of allegations against Bill Cosby erupted, Malcolm, like everyone else, faced an unanswerable dilemma. How do you respond to a mentor who once lifted you up, when that mentor has now become a symbol of abuse and betrayal? Stay silent and be seen as complicit. Speak out and risk betraying old memories. In that very moment, Malcolm Jamal Warner once again stood before the public, not as an actor, but as a living witness to a fallen empire. The question arises, can someone who was once America's TV dad, once a global icon, truly fall that far? And more importantly, how do people like Malcolm, those who were once guided by him, deal with that kind of collapse? That's a story no one can escape, the story of Bill Cosby and the fall of trust. Here is the English translation presented with your requested format: no bold, no italics, clear paragraph breaks and underlines between paragraphs. You've just witnessed the journey of pain and resilience that shaped Malcolm Jamal Warner, an artist who grew up under the spotlight and through quiet losses. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel to continue exploring the raw human layers of artists we thought we already knew. Don't forget to leave a comment about what made you reflect the most, and share this video with anyone who is also searching for connection through real stories. See you again on the next journey.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on the screen.